Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for watching this session. It's another one from our Matt Leader series where we at IMP Software interview a number of trust leaders, generally with a kind of a financial operation background or position within the Matt space, to just talk through their journey, their stories, what's happening in their trust, what they've tried, what works, what doesn't work, and really focusing on the kind of mechanical elements of Matt financial management. So today we've very kindly been joined by Sue Prickett, who is CFOO at a multi-academy trust called SENDAT. And rather than me getting your introduction wrong, Sue, could you introduce yourself and a little bit of background on how you ended up as CFOO at SENDAT, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely to join you, Will. So my background is essentially in management accounting. I did the SEMA qualification many moons ago. And when my children were young, I was involved in school life, very much so there. You know, I was sort of chair and treasurer of PTA and things like that. And I applied to be a primary school administrator, actually. Going back to January 15 now, and they got me in, and after a couple of weeks with Enhanced Finance backing me up, Enhanced Finance said, what on earth are you doing? You know, you've got an accountant sitting here, she can do all of this. So became the business manager at the school within a few weeks, and then the school academized, so we went from FMS to PSF. And I was there for a few more years, and saw an advert for the post was Chief Finance and Operations Officer, and it was advertised in the December. I'd missed applying because I saw it within sort of 24 hours of the deadline closing, and thought, oh, it's end of term, I'm not going to do it this time, and then sort of kicked myself over the Christmas holidays for not doing it. And then they didn't appoint at that point. Then they re-advertised in the January, so I went for it. I did do quite a lot of informal chat, so I called the CEO and said, you know, I'm just a primary school business manager. Is it worth me applying? So applied, and then they were going through a period of potential growth. So they decided at that point the job role was going to change. So they didn't appoint again, and didn't even interview at that point. But you know, with my dialogue with the CEO, it was, I'm really sorry, but at this point it's not fair to advertise that role. And then got an email from him in the Easter to say that we're gonna redo it. We're change the job spec and everything. So it was a real sort of, oh, I sort of thought that role, you know, I'd be all right at, be good at it, a real point of waiting and just sort of nosing around. But I just felt I'd plateaued where I was. There wasn't really much room for me to move on. And anyway, so it was, here's the new job spec if you want to apply. So I did, and got interviewed and appointed in the May. Started in the September, and it was just a whirlwind. It was year end, my first academy year end. You know, it was 2 new schools coming on board in the November. So it was a real learning curve, but it's been an exciting and really positive start. Did learn stacks in the first few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, and that learning doesn't stop. I think a lot of people will probably recognise that you landed in a position that was newly formed, newly created, and then away it went. Just to help kind of add some context to the rest of what we talk about, could you outline kind of SENDAT as a trust and what that looks like?
Okay, so when I first joined, it was really just a standalone. It was one school in Bury St Edmunds, and it was a special needs school. So we are a special needs trust, and that's our specialism, our area. And what we want to do is really provide that really expert knowledge across East Anglia and our neighbouring counties. So we now have 2 further schools in the trust, and they joined us in the November of my first term. Another academy very similar in size to our first one. So we've got Priory at Bury St Edmunds, Stone Lodge in Ipswich, and both of those have between sort of 170 and 200 pupils, which is reasonable size for special needs, and they're in old speak, moderate to complex learning difficulties, and I think it now has a slightly different label. And then we have a pupil referral unit based in Sudbury, which has space for 30. So it was quite different. Not only did I have to learn you know, what I was doing in my new role and all of those responsibilities, but just learning about special needs funding as well. So yeah.
I was saying that because I mean, it's a lot of learning involved in any trust formation or the first stages of trust growth, but in a special context where there aren't the stories, the advice doesn't seem to be there. How have you managed to, and because special needs funding varies local authority by local authority, how were you able to get up to speed with that?
I asked a lot of questions, I spoke to anybody, people I didn't know. I spoke to a lot, reached out. I hate that expression, it's so American. But I really did sort of put feelers out there on Twitter about SEND generally. And as soon as somebody said, yeah, I'm in special needs, I had a bit of a chat with them, a bit of Twitter dialogue. I knew a reasonable amount, I suppose, just from the mainstream background that I had. So it works very similar way. It's just that we are the place funding obviously is the 10,000, and then the top up that in a mainstream school is a very small proportion of your budget becomes a much larger proportion of your budget. And at that time, our first school, we had, I think, only 2 local authorities we were dealing with, and we now deal with 4 or 5. And so that's where it becomes really interesting, just to see the amount that you're getting and how the processes vary. And, you know, some local authorities we have to invoice, some pay us without, you know, even a nod. Yeah, so it's different. And it's one of those things that anybody who's involved in special education will say it's a real issue, the variances across the different local authorities.
And the pupils in the trust, are they kind of long-term pupils, or within the year is there lots of kind of in and out of
there's an element of transient, certainly at the pupil referral unit. They're not really supposed to be there for more than 3 terms, and the idea is that they go back into mainstream. In reality, they don't all go back into mainstream, and some of those will go into more specialist provisions, not necessarily ours. They might go on to more specific provisions that are relevant to their needs. One of the things that we're working with at the moment is working on special units within mainstream education, particularly with 2 high schools. So those sort of SEMH type units will hopefully look towards dealing with some of those children. We also, on one of our schools, have a specialist autism unit just for 6 pupils, and it's specifically for children aged from year 5 to year 9. And then they again might come into primary school, or they might go back into mainstream education. So there is some movement. Quite a lot of our students do stay on, and we also have a 6th form at primary school, and we run a post-16 provision in the middle of Bury St Edmunds for a slightly different learning pathway.
So you're coming up to the budget cycle at the moment, and we've got the 3-year plans. How do you kind of accommodate that potential? Is it the fact that you're oversubscribed, so you know you're going to be full, or how do you forecast for what that pupil mix will look like, and therefore the associated funding?
We are oversubscribed. The SEND need is just elemental. Within any local authority, I think they would say that. If I tell you that over the last sort of 1920, we had something like 89 referrals, and we had that in the first term of 2021. So, we're constantly, the referrals are constantly coming in. We're getting a slightly larger presence, I think, online now. People are hearing more of SENDAT as a trust, not just as associated with one school. And so we're getting more families coming to us via the website. We have our own specialist admissions part of the central team who deal with all of the admissions, whether they're coming via direct from families or whether they're coming via a local authority. Every child within our trust needs an EHCP. So all of the admissions are individually looked at and considered, and also look as well at the level of high needs funding that they might attract, and whether or not we can support that the needs of that child. But we do really, we don't want to turn children away. We want to be able to provide a provision for them, give them a place somewhere. So it's very much a case of looking to see what we have and the staffing levels that we've got, and whether or not we can squeeze them in.
You mentioned admissions there as part of the central team. What does the central team look like? Is it different from a mainstream multi-academy trust?
I think probably not overly different. We are, as I said to you in our little pre-chat, we're still quite a new trust. I had a really good sort of eye-opening chat with Nikki Gillespie from Leo Academy Trust when I was still in the first few weeks of getting these 2 new schools on board, and the way that their trust operated and the centralisation there really made me think this is how we need to do it, for lots of reasons. But one of the main reasons was that we were taking schools into our trust with not positive budgets. So one of them was operating, well, in fact, one was operating a deficit budget and one was very close to the wire. And because of that, we need to very quickly make some efficiency savings. And I really needed to be on it as far as the budgets were concerned. So I didn't want to pass those budgets to schools. So I wanted to take hold of those budgets centrally and really keep an eye on each line. So as part of our team, we decided very quickly that the finance team was going to be central. We already had the partnership director who looks for schools to partnership with and other trusts as part of the central team, and she's a really pivotal piece within the trust actually, and she takes just massive projects on. So the new schools, for instance, the new school bids that go out there, she project manages that. The new trust that we're doing the specialist units with, it's that sort of brokerage is going on via her. We have our HR director who oversees all of the HR within the trust. Payroll we outsource. And then it was a case of, okay, well, what else can we afford? And we very much knew that we wanted a therapies team. We very much knew that admissions were an issue, and admissions possibly more an issue centrally, because we have to make sure that the EHCPs and the annual reviews, which don't happen at a mainstream, are quality assured, and that process was consistent across the trust and for every single child. And so that admissions and therapies team is possibly something you wouldn't necessarily have in a mainstream trust, but that's quite a big part of our central team. But being able to have that centrally means we can offer all schools, all of our member schools, exactly the same quality.
You mentioned on budget, so you very much took control of budget. So that accountability at the moment, what's the relationship between kind of school and trust in both setting the budget and then ongoing monitoring and management of the budget?
Well, I set the budget. Then I go to the head teachers and we have discussions where they go, no, we can't possibly do that, and I need more staff and I need more curriculum. Essentially, their input comes from the trust development plan. So each school feeds into the whole trust development plan, and from the trust development plan we start to build the budget. The responsibility of the school to manage is essentially curriculum and education. So to a certain extent as well, they have some influence over the staffing levels. But if we can't afford it, then it's me that goes, no, we're going to have to think about how else we can reuse the resources that we currently have.
And how was that? I imagine for head teachers that have historically had ownership of budgets and responsibility, how was that transition, and how did you kind of manage that on a human kind of person perspective?
So we had one head teacher who had a huge amount of experience and very used to managing his own budget. And I have a lot of dialogue with him about the wider budget, but I like to think that the fact that we've come through not in deficit this year at that school is quite a positive step, and he can see the benefits of doing it centrally, and the I suppose the synergies in a way of using the same application that we use at one school with another school, and I think just communication all the way, you know, that they have valid experience that I don't have, and I completely freely admit to wanting to learn from them, and you know, if you can keep that pathway of communication open, that's really helpful.
Do you feel that you had a trial run for 12 months, you've had to prove yourself, you know, so there was some challenges along the way, and there was let's see what happens, and depending on the response, the output of that year would have changed that ongoing dialogue and kind of even ongoing journey in terms of centralisation of budgets?
No, I think perhaps I might well have had a trial run, and somebody might well come back and say, actually, Sue. But no, I think my CEO was very keen to keep things centrally, us responsible as a central team for budgets. He is very involved as well in the trust development plan. We do have quite a very tight higher level management group. So each of the heads of schools, myself and other members of the central team meet on a Tuesday, hour and a half. You know, we go through all of our main priorities for that week. And then each school feeds quite specific lines into the trust development plan, and that's a shared document, so I can access it at any point. I will, in fact, just talking this morning, I'm going to go through that with my new estates manager as well, so that we can look at some of the estates priorities across the trust, and we can prioritise using that document as to where we really need. And you know, there's a little bit as well about looking at your previous actual spend, but at the moment, because of COVID and because of the schools being so new, I don't feel that actual spend is really indicative as to what it would be like if we were operating with all students in all schools at the same time. So, you know, they're sort of learning curve still.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting you described it as a trust development plan, because often we see, and even in, I think, Financial Handbook, Academy Financial Handbook talks about school development plan. And that already, if you've got multiple school development plans, you're moving away from that centralisation and kind of in it together and working as a trust. So that, yeah, interesting that it's a trust development plan rather than a series of school development plan with a trust bit over the top, which is something that I've certainly seen.
Yeah, no, this is you know, it's Lawrence Chapman's our CEO, and it's really one of his major developments, and he's very keen that schools don't work in silos, and that we do work very much as one school with multiple campuses, which I think is a phrase one of your other trust leaders has said before, but it's really one I've taken away and thought that's exactly where we need to be. It's exactly how we want to work.
And I remember that was Jonathan Bishop from Cornerstone.
That's it, yeah.
I was one of his trustees, and he was always so firm on that exact view. Well, look, we've got 4 primary schools, that was their context. He's like, that's less than a secondary school. You know, we're smaller than a secondary school, so why would we have 4 budgets and 4 bank accounts? And he's very much lived that mantra. And also, I think he uses the story around, he's got 3 children. He doesn't spend an equal amount on each of the 3 children. It's allocated. You know, it's a family. It's for the best for the family. But when this child goes to secondary school and they need a laptop, or and that really resonates. How much that can stick as you get to 5, 10, 20, 30 schools. I guess the deep then in that transition, but absolutely in a small trust, we're seeing some really great things. So on that, how does the top slice work within SENDAT at the moment, and also what's the trajectory for that based on this really clear vision of, you know, one school, multiple campuses?
Yeah, well, obviously the vision is that the top slice is ultimately equal across all schools, but like Jonathan was saying, we have 2 schools with a lot of pupils, and then we have one school with comparatively few pupils, but they still have enormous running costs. And because it's a pupil referral unit, it's inherently slightly more expensive to run anyway, because, you know, windows take a huge bashing, door frames take a huge bashing, that sort of thing. So your maintenance costs are much higher. The way the trust developed initially was there were reserves built because we knew we wanted to expand, which essentially belonged to primary school and belonged to the trust, based on the recharge that was coming back from the trust. But we knew we wanted to expand. We knew we had reserves there in order to be able to do that. The two newer schools that we took on, I keep calling them new schools, but they're not new after nearly 18 months, did not have the budget to support the same level of top slice that we had at our flagship school, if you want. So essentially that top slice has varied slightly over the last 2 years. So the initial top slice at our pupil referral unit was really quite low. It was about 4%, and we've moved that now to 5%. And the other two schools vary between that and actually vary between that and 15%, where that school has reserves there. It's built some capacity up, but we know that we have no other income in order to spend on the other two newer schools, because we don't have those reserves there. They haven't yet been built. So it's a bit sort of just using those weighing scales to get that top slice right at the moment. And the way it really, if I'm completely honest, is what the budget can support. So it's sort of what comes out in the wash, if you like.
And is that something, I think you considering GAG Pooling, do you think top slice is a stepping stone? Because doing the dancing around a top slice mechanism when you're on the journey potentially to GAG Pooling, how helpful or challenging is that, the fact that there is a top slice policy in place that needs to be maintained until we get, because it sounds like you're operating really very much as a trust, you know, with your trust development plan. You've got differing top slices based on the abilities of each school, so you're kind of GAG pooling by
we are sort of in our own way, if you like, and we know that we're doing it in our own way. What's been a sort of stumbling block for us for completely GAG pooling is the amount within our budget, the proportion that is specifically related to high needs, particularly those children who are attracting the top bands of high needs. So we've had quite a lot of discussion between myself, between the CEO, between heads of schools, that has said, well, we manage a lot of those, the provision that actually supports those children attracting that banding. And in order to do that, we should be able to still pool all of that high needs. What potentially we might get back to is giving back a proportion for those who attract the very top levels of banding back to school level, but still retain, sort of 75% of it, for instance. I mean, this is all, these are our current sort of, melting pot plans, so that nothing's written in stone yet. And I think ultimately we will get to the point where we reapportion back to school based on pupils and need, but obviously, we need the school to operate, and it needs to be, safe, compliant, and it needs to be efficient, and still provide all the teaching and learning that all of those children need.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that's what can be kind of misleading. The term GAG pooling has so many different applications and varied approaches, and the key part for trusts is not whether you're GAG pooling ticking the box or not, it's whether that philosophy of actually operating as a trust, so whether you technically do GAG pooling or not, does it really matter? Are you able to operate as one? And if GAG pooling is part of that, fine, but GAG pooling for because I hate the term. I think it needs a rebrand, because it's not particularly,
well, it's not just GAG either for us. It's GAG, it's restricted, it's unrestricted. We would pool a lot if I had my way. I'd pool a lot, because the capital for, and it's not just for us, capital for any schools, the DFC is just a drop in the ocean, really. So the majority of our capital projects are funded by revenue, which is horrifying to think of, but it's the only way that we can do it. So we allocate a proportion of our revenue budget, knowing that we are going to need these capital projects. You know, we've got antiquated heating systems, antiquated electrical distribution boards, roofing issues, all of that, you know, and these are buildings from the 60s, 70s. They don't go on forever.
No, exactly. So linking back to, so there's a journey with GAG pooling potentially, whether it's GAG pooling or not, kind of irrelevant, but how does financial reporting then work today and in the background of doing things differently? Is school still a thing for financial reporting? Is it functional? How does that, and I know this is an ongoing thought, so it's a bit of a call.
Okay. Yeah, no, it is. So initially, the financial reporting was that I reported to the Finance and Audit Committee. It did not go to local governing board. So it went to Finance and Audit, and then it went to the full trust board. I was so used to reporting line by line per school in my previous role that's exactly what I did, and it very quickly became evident that doing this for 3 schools was unsustainable, and it was just too much information for the board to be able to digest, really. So we pared that down a little bit. We still needed a consolidated version that we could report against, so that we knew where we were as a trust. So quite a lot of consolidating of spreadsheeting, and that's where, you know, where I think I first got in touch with you as well, was how can we do this a little bit more efficiently. So we're now, it almost varies on a month-to-month basis what I give back to the board, because it's like, well, can we just try it this way? Because, you know, previously it was too much information. Is this too little? We're still highlighting it. What we've got to is reporting by exception. So we do, I do an overall summary, a reasonably high level, where it's income split down by government grants, non-government grants and high needs. And then it's staffing as a cost, other income operating expenditure, other operating expenditures cost, and that gives us our sort of bottom line. And then there's a reasonably summarized capital report as well. So that's where we are now. And then I give a, you know, any highlight areas of concern, even if they're not areas of concern. So I just pick out from each school maybe 2 or 3 really key points of that particular month or half term. We still only report to the Finance and Resources Committee. The local governing boards at school level do not get involved. I'm more than happy to, you know, give anybody, any of our governing body members, a chat through with the finances. We regularly have other members of the board sitting in as observers for finance and audit, just particularly for the new members of the board, so they can really get their head around what they're looking at when it gets to matters arising from resources from finance and audit. So it is evolving. I have some really, really good finance, some really strong finance members of the board, of the trust board, who are quite keen to help, and really good sounding boards as to, you know, do you think this is enough? Do we think this is working? What other KPIs do we need to see? That sort of thing. So it's great. They're a really involved, very supportive board.
Yeah, that's it. Board challenge is a fine balance, and you know, if they're at the right place. I think it's a really important point there around financial reporting changing month to month or term to term. Maybe you're exaggerating, like, but it doesn't stay still. You know, there's not anywhere to say, well, here's our management accounts, and it doesn't change, because I mean, certainly in the last 12 months, the situation changes, and therefore what is interesting to the board and where attention should be drawn is going to be very different right now than it was 12 months ago and pre-COVID. What comparisons do you show when you is that year-to-date versus year-to-date budget? Is it out-term versus full year? Is it this year versus prior year?
It is budget, and it is year-to-date forecast. So we're expecting, you know, the forecast, the August outturn to be at this point in time. we also have several percentages that we report against. So she says going completely blank. So we have the teaching cost, we have percent of expenditure to income, teaching cost to income as well. So yeah, and I think what we're trying to get to now is which are the most useful KPIs to really lead the expenditure and the budget setting.
And that is trial and error, especially, you know, a trust that's been through so much in the last 24 months, including a global pandemic. You've got to find your feet, and just deciding a set of KPIs and sticking with them, you know, holding on to them for dear life. That okay, it's consistent, but is that the best way? So I think that iterative approach, challenge and kind of suggestions from both sides, from Burnley and from the board, is yeah, really important.
Yeah, I'm quite mindful as well that, you know, the previous year was 10 months for 2 schools. So anything that we compare for the full year is still only comparable to 10 months. And of those 10 months, a number, you know, 6 months of those were a pandemic. So I think we're taking a lot of things with a pinch of salt at the moment. Obviously, we still need a realistic projection as to where we're going to be at year end. And whilst what I'm reporting may vary, or the style of my reporting may vary, certainly the building blocks to get to that point are exactly the same. So we've got all of the backup documentation, the line by line consolidation, and that sort of thing, and the assumptions, they're all exactly the same. That methodology is the same.
And you're right, because with all of this confusion and, you know, having a comparison is useful to assess performance. It can be useful to assess, as you say, the wrong comparison will do the opposite. But the one thing that's important is the outturn for this year. That's the main objective. If you can say where that's going to be and then how that's moving, that the comparison, yes, it adds some extra context and some extra flavor, but the focus needs to be on the outturn number, and anything else that can help contextualize that, great, but not at the cost of, well, let's do our comparisons or our KPIs or our analysis, whereas the outturn is at certainly this year and probably next year, that outturn figure is the one that is king.
Yeah, I did do a bit of a hold your breath moment this September before submitting all of our BFR information, because we were still waiting for those confirmations for the teachers' pay and conditions and the NJC award as well. So, you know, I knew what my assumptions were, but I just wanted to make sure of the impact of them, and that, you know, what was going, if there was going to be any further financial impact before those announcements were crystallized. So it came in sort of just before the deadline. And I said to the board, you know, I really want to just revise one section of it, and that's all I'm going to revise, just that, because otherwise all of our reporting is instantly going to be archaic. So we did do that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think with a forecast, you know, people say, well, why do a forecast in September or October? We don't really know anything. Well, it's something, and as long as the next one is better, and that's the thing with monthly forecasting or termly, the next one is always going to be better. So don't worry about a perfect forecast in October or November. As long as November is better than October and December is better than November, it's then just that iterative process that means, you know, you're getting closer to the right answer, which is ultimately the year-end actual. And it can be done, certainly back to September, as you say, back to September and October, when there's still so many assumptions and there's still things around catch up, and when the school's going to be open, there's so much unknown. There's no point putting too much emphasis on any particular forecast in the year, because as long as you're agile and you're able to continue that moving.
And I'm sure, very much like, you know, most of your trust leaders as well, there is always that element of contingency within the budget, where I've just built in just a little bit extra, just in case, you know, it's going to cost us that little bit more, which I'm always so reluctant to release. So it gets to about July and I think, okay, yeah, we've got a little bit here then that we thought. Yeah,
that's important, because you can't spread yourself too thinly, because there are some changes that can. And if 80% of your cost is staffing, is it 80% for you guys, or is it
across the trust? It's just about 80%. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't make big changes to budgets. So if something surprising comes up on income or expenditure, if 80% is locked up in staffing, your agility is low. Just lastly, just before we kind of round this up, DfE chart of accounts, it's been floating around for a while now. It's getting a bit more traction. What's your views on, are you using it? Are you resigned to the fact you're going to have to use it, or do you want to use it, or something else?
I think it makes a massive amount of sense that everybody is using the same essentially nominals. You know, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you be able to walk out from one job into another job and know exactly what one nominal means? I think it makes a huge amount of sense. We haven't as yet adopted it, partly because we haven't had a minute to even think about adopting new nominals. You know, we've added to our nominals. One of the really important exercises for us was mapping our nominals to the chart of accounts, which we did using IMP, and hopefully, you know, that's going to really aid our reporting as well. And it highlighted for us where we had gaps, and we've endeavoured to fill those gaps with our own nominals, but then they're now mapped to the DfE chart of accounts. What it also highlighted to me was that the DfE chart of accounts is still in itself, I think, I mean, there's probably somebody at the DfE now who's going to strike me down and smoke me, but there are still overlaps within that chart of accounts. So there still appears to be areas where I think, oh, okay, it could sit there. Oh, well, it might sit over there. You know, there's quite a lot of discussion on the FD forum as well, which is useful to say, okay, where have you put this? So there's always somebody out there that says, oh, well, I've put it over here because of that. But I don't think as yet it's entirely ready for adoption. I think they can still, you know, it's not quite mapping the accounts that we use.
We found on that people plumbing it into their budget before it goes anywhere near actuals is a nice way to iron out any kinks that you might have with that mapping between your set and the chart of accounts, because with budget data you can move budget data. However, if you adopted a new chart of accounts from September, by the time you get to November, December and you realize it's wrong or there's challenges, you've got 3 months of kind of unpicking to do. So I would say anybody looking at it, have a go at it with your budget setting cycle that you're going through now, because that is the soft way to find out those challenges.
Yeah, I hadn't actually considered doing it that way, but I can see how that would be really useful. Yeah,
you commit to it then in your finance system, because your budget's not real, it's not a transactional thing that's moving as such, so that can help. But we'll see. I mean, we're seeing many trusts in a similar position to you, mapping to it, finding there's some challenges, buy into the overall principle. I think scratching head a little bit on balance sheet codes still, because there are hundreds.
Yes.
600.
But I think, you know, you're probably going to get to the point where you know your little core structure. You know, there's all, and probably it's until you do something outside of that normal day-to-day where you think, oh, is there going to be a different code for that? And it's just having that practice that makes you think, let's have a look, let's see if there's another code we could map to, which, you know, you just need to have that headspace to be able to do that, don't you? And I think headspace is it's quite full at the moment with pandemics and growing trusts and things like that.
Precisely. I was going to speak about the pandemic, but I think we've kept you for long enough today, and it's been really fascinating to hear about that trust development. And I think, you know, considering how relatively young you are, you've done a great job of just instilling that we're one. And I think that's a lot of the battle that trusts are facing, where they're 4 years old, they've got 10 schools. It's changing that rhetoric from being a service that is paid for with a fixed amount to a kind of holistic change in operating. So yeah, I think you've done a good job. And also thank you very much for being so candid and sharing your time with everybody.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It was, you know, one of those 10% braver moments.
Yeah, well, yes, very brave. And if people want to reach out because they've got some questions, or I'd like to speak to you further, or I think they could help.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. If anybody wants to come to me and say, this is the reason, and this is exactly your next steps for GAG pooling, give me a call, send me an email.
Yeah, well, and me, please. How would they get hold of you, Sue?
They can email me, sue.prickett@sendat.academy. you know, look us up on the website. There's a phone number on the website, but please do get in touch. I'm a huge believer in networking, huge believer. I think you can learn so much from each other. And at the end of the day, when we get back to conferences, we can all go for a drink.
Yes.
She says, hopefully.
What a great note to end it on. I am firmly in that camp. So thanks again, Sue, for joining us.
You're really welcome, Will.
And thanks everyone for watching, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.